Okay, the video that I tried to shoot before did not work, so that's why your Nearpod is taking longer, and today is just a weird day. So I'm trying to present. Okay, so we ended here, and then I wanted to give you all just a couple of examples using RSVP. Um, it's just a good practice round for you. So if we were using informal assessment and going through this process, reliability, in order for informal assessments to be considered reliable, you'd want to do multiple over time and look for patterns in your students' data. So you wouldn't want to just do one and done in informal assessments because, they are not standardized. So it is hard to formally compare students if you only have one to base it off of. In terms of validity, it may not give us as accurate data, which is why you want those multiple assessments. Informal, especially if a student is having a rough day or they aren't taking it seriously because they weren't told to prepare for it, things like that, it may not be testing what you intended it for it to test. So validity may be compromised. And then practicality, of course, is pretty strong because they're so easy to do, accessible, cheap. So you just want to treat your data as an actual hypothesis, and you need confirmation with multiple being done, or maybe using a formal assessment to confirm your informal assessment ideas. This is the slide for paper pencil assessment. I didn't formally talk about it because it's pretty cut and dry, but just know there are different types of paper pencil. So of course the fill in the blank, alternative, matching, multiple choice that are black and white, right or wrong, and then the recall tasks, which are or application tasks like short response essays, math problems, things like this. So if we were to do RSVP with a paper pencil assessment, the reliability may be more stable with the right wrong answers, but then when you get to those open-ended responses, that's where your reliability may change over time. So maybe one year your class performs one way with it, and then the next year a class performed completely different with it. And that could be because of your reliability, or students are performing way differently. Standardization, you can easily standardize the black and white right or wrong ones, but of course when it comes to you can easily standardize the application and the short response ones as well. And you can also tailor assessments. So thinking about standardized test students with IEPs and 504s, they have accommodations, so that's good as well. Validity, you're going to have a good sample of valid content for the black and white answers, and then for the more in-depth response, validity may be a little more at risk, which is why those rubrics come in handy. And then practicality, these are more practical than things like maybe performance assessments, which I think is the next one. Yeah, so you'll see here that performance assessment is hard to check out with a lot of the RSVP aspects. However, it just takes more planning. So that's why you don't see performance assessment being done every day in a classroom, because they're not as practical. They are more in depth. They require more time, planning, resources, things like this. And yeah, going through the RSVP, you're just going to need several indicators to really ensure that this is a accurate assessment for your students. And so, we talked about how students are really at the heart of assessments, even though traditionally it doesn't seem that way. So make sure you ask your students, what are some types of ways that we could prove our knowledge on this content? You're going to want to compare your students' ideas and their perceptions versus your ratings, and see where there's a disconnect maybe going on. Have students create the practice items. I would have students create FSA questions, and I thought, that was good practice for them when they had to take that actual question on the test. And so that's a learning tool and an assessment tool. And then reflection. I have you reflect after every lesson. It's not just because I like to do it, it's because it's research based to help solidify content knowledge. And so, encourage that risk taking through frequent assessments, not just like one and done, right? You've got multiple opportunities to prove yourself. Maybe you can even correct errors. You guys know, like in this course, you can always address my feedback and resubmit. That was a thing in my 5th grade class too. If a student didn't perform well, maybe it became their morning work, and they would address my feedback, or they would bring it home and they would address it then. And I would always revise their grade, because if you're doing the work, then why not? If that's learning in my book. And then yes, retaking assignments when appropriate, of course. So there are some broader issues that go into play here. Things like student ability levels. So we've talked about individualized differences. So really thinking how that looks in your assessments. Group differences, so we touched on culture, but also knowing, indicators such as gender and SES come up with certain assessments. So you want to be just sensitive to, is your classroom safe? Are there going to be barriers for certain students? Things like that. Your expectations matter on these. Your students are susceptible to how you believe you think they're going to do, right? And then teaching the language of testing is huge, because especially with these big standardized tests, a lot of it comes down to we're testing whether students know how to take a test versus their content knowledge. And so one thing I did in my class was, created those metaphors for them. So I told them, you can't just go into the FSA having not done any practice, having, disregarded the opportunities I gave for you to practice. This test is very much like a free throw shot. So, you think about the players in the NBA, how many free throw shots do they take to be able to do it well? And so we would practice FSA stemmed questions. I would model my questions off of the way the test was going to do them. And so my students could be comfortable with the language of the test. We would learn strategies to, eliminate. I would tell them, this is the trickster. There's always going to be one that's almost right. And so we talk about those things. And I think at the end of the day, if your students know the language of the test, then they can further prove their ability on the actual content, which is what we want to know. I had a student, Kedrick, who, I kid you not, during the middle of his reading FSA, he's raising his hand. I'm like, yeah, what's up, babe? What do you need? And he goes, Miss Parrots, this is so much fun. And I was like, this is the best day of my life, because I had taught them like how to go through the text, annotate the text, create a theme statement, find evidence, eliminate the ones that don't work. Like, it became a game at the end of the day. That's where that intrinsic motivation then comes in, because you're feeling confident, right? Self-determination theory. And then things such as, student labeling, making sure that we're accommodating students who have those unique needs, taking student motivation into account. Are we assessing their lack of motivation? Are we assessing their content knowledge, right? And then that encouragement of risk-taking. And reducing testing anxiety. We know that this is something that's huge in today's academic culture. So these are just some strategies for you to reduce and manage that test anxiety. So just so you can see them, I'll move my screen. You can pause. I won't read them all out loud. But also knowing that mindfulness is an up-and-coming strategy for students. So doing breathing exercises before tests. I saw classrooms do, I'm replacing this feeling with this feeling. And they would go around and every student would say what they're replacing their fear or stress or anxiety with courage or positivity or power, whatever it was. And then they would do like a breath exercise. So that's something as well. And so just knowing that your assessment really should be instruction. So your students should be learning through whatever assessment it is that you've given them in some way, shape, or form. And so just some strategies for you. We've talked about showing the criteria and the models so that your students know what's expected of them. There's no questions, right? Assess before teaching, so that diagnostic test. Here is just an example of a unit plan that I had in my English language arts class. And so you can see, based on my data that I had previously done, assessments, that diagnostic assessments, even using my summative data from another unit as diagnostic data for my next unit. That's where it gets a little more in depth. But the ones that are highlighted are the ones that my students were not meeting proficiency. So less than 60% of my students were doing well on the highlighted standards. So I knew when I planned out this unit, those were the ones that needed to be explicitly emphasized. So that's just an example of that. And then, offering those choice menus so students have that sense of agency and autonomy, that feedback matters. You all know, I try to get your assignments back as quick as possible because it matters. We know that. And so it's hard when you're so busy as a teacher. So you're going to have to, figure out that balance. And then encouraging self-assessment and self-regulation in your students, goal setting, and allowing new evidence of learning to replace maybe evidence that wasn't as strong before. And so I encourage you to think about what your philosophy on assessment is as a teacher. And you're going to want to grapple with that before you walk into interviews. And before you interact with students, you need to know, what do you believe assessment should be and look like, and all these things in your classroom. So there is a Kahoot on the next slide. When you go, it'll take you to an independent Kahoot, but I think that it still has a competition within the class, so that could be kind of fun. There's your reflection at the end that I hope that you do. And then Thursday, I promise we will do a live lesson together. I'm really hoping that all of us can make it to that one. But I understand if not, I'll record it if not. And so if you go to Kahoot, you're going to put in the game pin 07664409. That was 07664409. You might want to write it down. Do the Kahoot. We'll see who comes out on top. And I will see you guys on Thursday. I again apologize about today. Know that, just like you didn't sign up to be online students, I didn't sign up to be an online teacher, and I know that all my announcements have been confusing, and I'm sorry. I'm trying. Anyway, I hope you guys have a good few days, and I'll see you later. So have a good one. Adios.